What is awakening? This is a little bit more nuanced and detailed answer to that question, okay? Because awakening, even it's so simple, like so ridiculously simple, that initial recognition is actually not just one particular shift, like this completed awakening entails multiple shifts and multiple phases, and sometimes they're called stages of awakening. So I want to talk about that, And there are many maps that we can use to describe this journey, this process, these shifts at the identity level and at the level of perception. And I'm going to use here the unfettering model, which I got to know from Kevin Schanilec. And I like this model because instead of describing what are we waking up to, it describes fetters, right, or obscurations or veils, and there are 10 of them, that are blocking us or restricting us from perceiving reality without belief. So all of these 10 fetters, you could say that in a way they are various forms of beliefs. And this is a very simplified way of saying it. So I want to unpack it in the following. So what is often called first awakening, meaning this fundamental recognition, is in this model referred to as the dropping of the first fetter, which is the fetter of the self-image, okay, which is the belief in a separate self as a mental construct, meaning that when you say the word I or make an I statement, or you have an I thought, there is a very felt sense that it actually refers to someone, some kind of a separate self, who is having that experience, who is the thinker of thoughts, to whom the experience is happening, to whom the thoughts are referring to. Okay, so that's the self-construct. And we can learn these things intellectually, philosophically, psychologically, really, really well. We can really understand it and look at our experience and see, that there is no such thing. And yet the experience is still happening. There is still a very obvious sense of I-ness or me-ness, as the perceiver of thoughts, or to whom the thoughts are referring to, at the center of the experience, or who is the doer in the experience, who is the individual agent. So that's why dropping this fetter, when it actually happens, is really nothing you could ever expect. It has nothing to do with any kind of intellectual or psychological or philosophical understanding. Is not some sort of rationalization. You can't do it with logic, right? You can't force it to happen. You can't make it to happen. So it's purely spontaneous when it does happen, and it can happen even though if you wouldn't have any background in spirituality, even if you've never done any practice, even if you had no intention for this type of awakening. So people can have this self-construct fall away, which allows this clear seeing, of the absence of a separate self. And so the actual experience is somehow very deeply personal, when it happens. It's the most intimate. It's not an experience, but it's kind of like an event, that you never really come back from. And that's what makes this so different from, experience, because we could have this recognition that I was describing here in a very genuine manner, in a non-conceptual manner, in a direct manner, but it doesn't take root for some reason. So the self-construct doesn't actually drop, the fetter doesn't drop, but we could still have this experience in a meditation, or taking a psychedelic substance, or just spontaneously walking in the nature, so this is very possible, and for a lot of spiritual practitioners, it tends to happen like this, that we have these experiences, you could say. But there's a fundamental difference between having an awakening experience and this type of shift, irreversible shift at the identity level and at the level of perception. And that's one way I would define a genuine awakening shift, that it's irreversible. Something drops away. Whereas in experience, it's rather that it feels like something is added, that you are given this experience, which is something you didn't have before. And this is a simplified way of talking about it, but I think it can a little bit illuminate the difference to this shift at the identity level, where it more feels like something drops away, but at the same time, what drops away never really was there, right? So the self-construct never was there as anything other than assumption. We assume that there is, in the center of the experience, a separate self, an entity, a me entity. We assume that it's there. So when the fetter drops away, it's not as if the separate self drops away. It's more like we see that it never was there in the first place. It only appeared to be there. But when we looked really, really, really close, we saw it's just not there. It's just not there to be found. And when this clear seeing is so thorough, that it really penetrates our whole being, then this shift can occur. And at the same time, this fundamental recognition takes place that replaces that old way of perceiving yourself, perceiving yourself as a me entity, like someone actually being there. And the recognition is wordless, is non-conceptual. But one way that I like to describe the recognition in connection with the first awakening is that you recognize this pure immediacy, this pure openness, this presence of what you are. And it's not your presence. It's just that there is this spontaneously present, cognizing quality to the experience. And that is what you are. That is what you are. And the thoughts are not happening to the presence. It's more like the presence, the cognizing quality is that which makes thought itself possible, as a kind of conscious experience. But the thoughts are in no way defining that presence. They are not happening to that presence. So there is this freedom, from your sense of self being defined by any kind of thought process whatsoever. You see experientially that the I thought is just a thought. It seems to be referring to someone, I, me, but actually it doesn't. And you directly see how ridiculous it is. And you can still use, that I statements, when you speak at the relative level, it doesn't like negate the relative experience of, you could say, the relational self. But if you look very, very close to the experience, you always see that from the absolute point of view, it doesn't make sense. Like there is no I. Okay, so this is the first fetter. And in the unfettering model, what drops with the first fetter is the second and third fetter. And those are self-doubt, or sometimes it's called doubt about dharma, or doubt about the possibility of enlightenment, which is very, very strong for people like before the first awakening happens. Usually you go through this massive, massive doubt or dark night. It can happen in different ways for different people. So this is what drops away. It doesn't mean that self-doubt never arises again, because it will. There's further stages to still go through this in this process. But this fundamental doubt, that constant nagging doubt about yourself, that drops away, and it's replaced by this natural kind of confidence and trust in this direct immediacy, in this what is sometimes called your true nature, in this cognizing quality of experience, this presence. And the third fetter is this, what is called sometimes rites and rituals, okay, in the unfettering model. And that's also something we don't really see how much it is there, but when it drops away, we can kind of see that this very solid, sense of self, that it came with a very rigid and habitual, you could say, like patterns of behaving in our everyday life that we were using as a way to maintain our sense of self. And interestingly enough, for spiritual people, for people who've been into spiritual practice and practicing within lineages for many, many years before having this shift happening, these behavioral patterns, these rites and rituals, these very rigid rules, they actually have taken a form of a kind of spiritual lifestyle. So when you have this shift happening, when this fetter drops away, if you happen to be a spiritual person, it's very likely that what drops away then is your spiritual lifestyle, this type of formal practice, this type of rigid practice, this type of rules, self-righteousness, all of that. And then for another person, for example, like if your daily routines and rituals will build around, let's say, a healthy lifestyle, like right kind of diet, eating very specific things. So if the shift happens, then usually the effect will be that will drop away. You kind of just suddenly, you just eat whatever, it just stops making sense, like being so obsessed, about things having to happen in a very specific way in your everyday mundane life in your home. So it's very individual for each and every person. What are those rites and rituals? But they are very connected to this fundamental sense of being a separate self, and how we control, or how we create an illusion of control for ourselves through those rites and rituals. Illusion of control and illusion of safety, security. Okay, so that's the first shift. And there's a lot more to say about that, but this is supposed to be a kind of overview. So I'm gonna move on with it. So in the unfettering model, the next phase is then fourth and fifth fetter, and sometimes they are called reactivity or ill will and desire. So they've been all the time, of course, operating in our system behind a sense of self. So now when the self-construct is not there anymore, so the experience is a little bit more unfiltered. So now we're going to directly actually feel what reactivity is. And how it shows up is all the would and could and should statements. So if something happens in our life and we get really triggered, if we really look closely into the experience, we can usually find some sort of would or should or could statements. Like, for example, like if this person would just apologize, then I would feel, or if I would have been able to act differently in that situation, then my life would be different. Okay, so there's many versions that this can take. So it can be directed either towards yourself, that I should have done this differently, I could have done it differently, I would have done it, then reality would be different, and so on and so on. So then it comes, of course, a lot of guilt, remorse, blaming yourself. Or it can be directed towards other people around you, that person should be different, that person should do something differently than what they're doing, that person could be different than what they are, that person could be doing or acting differently or taking action, whatever, and they are not. And if they would do that, then reality is different. So it's but those are actually just symptoms. All those could and would and should statements, they're symptoms. So they're not the fetters in itself. They're not the ill will and desire in itself. So we really, at this stage, it's really important to kind of feel directly in a very physical manner this energy of personal will in our system, because that is what we are actually dealing here. That is what is the form of self that is underneath the self construct. So this, that even if the sense of separate self has fallen away, in a sense that we see, very clearly that it's not really there, that doesn't mean that the sense of separation has ended or that there is no sense of self anymore. Yes, at the level of the mind, at the level of consciousness, it's very clear that there's no sense of self. But the personal will is still living in our system, and that is a form of self. And there are further forms of self that we will still find when we go further in this process. But with the fetters 4 and 5, it's really this very instinctual and impulsive and kind of unconscious pushing and pulling that is constantly happening around thoughts and around sensations and around emotions. Because thoughts, sensations, emotions are never a problem in itself. There's no suffering, Just a thought arises, thought disappears. But what creates angst or fixation is when we start to push and pull around a thought. So it's our relationship to the thought that is actually creating a form of grasping. So we are either, avoiding, rejecting, repressing, or we are grasping, we are holding on. And those are actually two sides of the same coin. So every time when we are holding on, we are grasping, we are at the same time rejecting, the reality as it is, not being fully available for it. And every time we are strongly suppressing or avoiding, we are actually holding on to something. We are holding on to something. Some sort of belief, some sort of idea, about ourselves or about reality. And another way of talking about all these would be control and resistance. So now we are really coming in a very direct way in touch with control and resistance, which wasn't actually available for us prior to First Awakening. So that is one way of kind of explaining why people can sometimes suffer even more intensely after First Awakening than before that. Because now there is this unfiltered nature to the experience. There are still a lot of perceptual filters, but with the self-construct, we have now access to direct immediacy, like direct non-conceptual immediacy. So we really start to feel in a lot more acute manner all these ways that we are arguing with reality, all the ways we are trying to manipulate the experience, manipulate other people, manipulate reality to be what it is, all the ways we're trying to control, basically. And there's many ways to work with these two fetters, but my experience is that underneath them, there is often kind of very, very deep trauma, often really, really early trauma or developmental trauma for most people. And all this pushing and pulling, all this ill will and desire, they are very bound, that unresolved trauma in our system. So often when we work with reactivity, if we work in a very genuine and sincere manner, it will take us then all the way down, into that core wounding in our system, and allow enough integration and healing and assimilation that these fetters, they start to weaken, they are broken. Because these fetters don't drop away at once for no one. So they are something that are usually like gradually weakened or broken, slowly, and perhaps like almost completely dropped at some point, that it just doesn't anymore arise at all, any kind of would or could or should belief statements about reality. That it completely disappears, this belief that reality could or should be anything other than it is. Okay, but that's further on the road. And now what's really fundamental here is just to weaken these fetters enough, to loosen them enough that they are not completely controlling our behavior, right? Because at this stage, we can actually start to realize how they have been controlling, how these fetters, these beliefs, they've been controlling almost all of our interactions, right? And the trauma bodies underneath them. So we kind of start to realize that, hey, we haven't actually been free at all in our whole life. Like everything has been more or less just a mechanical, reactive, impulsive response, not an organic response. Meaning it's been reaction, like dictated, by these fetters. So this work is often not so glamorous, it doesn't come with these very fancy spiritual insights and illuminations, and it's not sexy. It is not that type of stage of awakening that you can, go around and tell amazing stories about, amazing shifts and insights and so on. Like this is kind of like just the hard work that needs to be done. First of all, that the first awakening, that it can really embody itself, in this human level, and it can really be integrated. So that it's not just an insight at the level of the mind, but is actually something we start to live, with our whole of our being. And the second reason why it's so important to do this work is that if you continue further with the awakening process and you haven't done this work, you will have to do it at some point, and if these fetters, these later fetters in the process drop, and they are still really strong in our system, the fetters 4 and 5, the ill will and desire, the intensity of the experience is going to be beyond description. The intensity of that will, that primal will, and pushing and pulling, that primal instinctual reactivity to thought, emotion, sensation, that kind of restlessness. It's going to be super intense the more unfiltered the experience gets. So that's why it's suggested in this model to really do this work, after the first awakening, to really kind of do the shadow work, do emotional work, do not bypass it. Okay. So until this point of the awakening process, we could actually say that the experience is still very human. Okay, so we could have the first awakening shift happening and really realize that, there's really nothing spiritual about this. It's almost ridiculous like that. You see, hey, there's nothing, absolutely nothing spiritual about this recognition of the immediacy, right? And the seeing, that the self-referencing thoughts don't refer to an actually existing entity. There's nothing spiritual about it whatsoever. So that can be really astonishing, and the work with the 4th and 5th fetters too. It's there's nothing particularly spiritual about it. But after we now go further in the process, that is when these deeper, you could say, filters of reality that create the kind of consensus sense of reality, as we are conditioned by society to think that that's what's happening, that there's an actual world outside there, objectively speaking, consisting of physical matter, that consciousness is inside a body, physical body, that there are actual boundaries, that there are objects outside there, that we can perceive around us, that there's space, physical space, that there's subject, that there's time, there's distance. So all of this stuff is all about the Fetters 6th to onwards. And that's when we are really now approaching these like non-dual ways of perceiving reality. So the first awakening is not yet a shift to non-duality. It's not. So that's why I think it's sometimes misunderstanding to speak about it in those terms. Okay. So the Fetters 6th is the experience of there being some sort of subject in the center of the experience. Because that can still be there. Even the self-construct has been seen through. And even if the reactivity, the Fetters 4 and 5 have been very much broken and weakened, and this fundamental resistance and pushing and pulling and managing the experience is not really anymore occurring, and is replaced by this natural relaxation and ease, there can still be very much a sense that there is some sort of reference point within in the center of the experience. So if I perceive something around me, let's say there's a tree, I'm looking at the tree, there is this movement inwards that seems to refer to an actually existing subject as a perceiver of the tree. So it creates this fundamental object and subject dichotomy in the experience. And that's just one way of experiencing it. Another way of experiencing it would be that you experience that you are somehow at the center of the experience, that there is a center of the experience in the first place, and then everything around you kind of fades and fades and fades and fades away into, I don't know, into infinity. So it's very like spherical, the perception, and inside there is a very strong sense of a center. So at this phase, people can intuitively or intellectually, philosophically understand non-duality, especially if they had the first awakening, they can very much understand that, there's no actual boundaries, it's just the presence is totally undivided. I can see it directly in my experience, and yet they keep still feeling that somehow the presence is located in the center. And the world, even if it's seeing nothing other than presence, it still seems to be something, around you, something, there seems still some sort of sense of distance. And usually there's some sort of sense of time as well. Usually with the first awakening, we can access this type of timeless quality of this openness, of this presence, of this immediacy, but we still experience time. We still experience that we are somehow moving in time, and there's some sort of personal history behind us. Even we see that it's actually created just by thought, and thought is just memory. There can still be very much a sense that I'm carrying inside of me certain experiences from the past, and I'm still here somehow as a subject of the experience. So the dropping away of the 6th fetter, that's what I would call is the end of separation. That's the end of the experience of separation, not just at the level of the mind, but also at the level of the body in a very embodied way. And sometimes in some traditions, I guess, this particular shift is called unity consciousness, but I think that's highly misleading description. And I'm personally, I have stopped to use that expression altogether, because unity consciousness for most people, it's a state, right? People can experience it taking psychedelics or doing meditation practice and so on, but it's really mostly something that happens at the level of the mind. It's an experience. It has a beginning, it has an end, and And the shift here with the dropping of the sixth fetter into a genuine non-separation, again, it's not a state, it's not an experience, it's an irreversible shift. Irreversible. When this sixth fetter drops, it's never going to come back. So it's not some sort of thing you open up every now and then it closes. It's nothing like that. It drops and it's radical shift in so many ways in what you take yourself to be and what you take reality to be. And nothing can really prepare for this, just like the other shifts that follow from here on. And what's really surprising about it, that it's really very energetic, the feeling that when it happens, it's very energetic, it's very embodied. To me, it was this sense that my psyche that had prior to this moment, it felt like something bound. And for me, it felt located at the level of the heart. So that's where I felt the psyche was mainly located as a center of the experience. And it's simply released. It's simply released. After that, there's the experience of the psyche. It's totally boundless. Totally boundless. And with the psyche, I mean all the psychological processes, which are felt in a very, very physical manner, actually. So this experience of non-dual boundlessness, it's really beyond description. It's really beyond description. It's not just some sort of mental insight that, oh, everything is boundless consciousness. No, it's really something that you feel with whole of your being, that there's actually no boundaries. You feel everything. You feel other people's sensations and emotions and processes as if they would be your own, without being at all able to put it even in words. What is it that those people are experiencing? But you feel them. You feel them if they are close to you. You feel them even apart. So this is one sign of the shift actually happening, that there is this very visceral type of empathy, which is not emotional empathy. It's a lot more kind of embodied and real. It's like you really feel other people's sensations as if they would be your own. You feel the environment. There's just no separation anymore whatsoever. Okay. And this shift can be experienced in, again, so many ways, depending on the person. For some people, it can be terrifying, because it's just so different than what, what we are conditioned to think about, what everything is. This non-dual boundlessness, it's quite amazing. So for some people, it can just come with this huge relief and joy. Like it came for me, this particular shift. It was just tremendous, just awe, and kind of like wow kind of elements. That was for me. I was just like look around me, and I couldn't locate myself anymore anywhere particular. It was like I was everything, but at the same time I wasn't anything particular. So I think that's one way you can experience this shift, that suddenly you feel yourself to be everything equally, and you can't anymore say that I'm more here than I'm more there. It's like I'm here and there simultaneously, but you can't locate yourself anymore. So when the center goes, that's how it very much feels like. It can still feel as if there's a distance in the experience, but at the same time, it's very clear that it's very subjective, the experience of the world around you, because you see that the world is really nothing other than yourself. Like the world is literally what you are. Okay. And again, it's not a state, it's not an experience. It's an irreversible shift. And many people have had it, and it's totally possible. And it's totally possible to live from this, live in this way. It just requires a bit of acclimation, okay, to adjust. So that's the sixth fetter. And the seventh fetter is this dropping away of form. So any kind of form. so that's like this deep end of non-duality, this realization of the formlessness of everything. So how it feels like is that that, hey, there's actually no physicality whatsoever. I'm not sitting in a room, there's no body. When I look around, there's no any kind of world. There are no objects at all. There's no walls around me. And it's just so clear that this formless nature of everything, it's really impossible to say what it is. It's more like something drops away. And what drops away is this attachment to form, this illusion of the confinement, as form. And it can come with this tremendous sense of lightness. Okay, so it's like suddenly everything is totally just weightless and light. And there's also this very illuminated quality to it. So it's like everything is just totally luminous. Like you look around, but there's not you looking around. There's just a looking, but you can kind of just recognize that all of this is actually just light. Reality is just light. It's just formlessness. It's just the luminescence. It's not physical light, but it doesn't have any actual reality. It's not actually existing. That's what drops away with form, is this belief in inherent existence, something actually existing, something actually being there, something actually having born, and something actually dying. That's what drops away. You see that none of that was never there. So it's very empty, the perception like that. Okay, so now we are getting like really to the deep stage of realization. And we are coming to the eighth fetter, which is sometimes called the I am conceit, or the belief that I exist. And it's not a belief in any conventional way, obviously. So it's this type of the most fundamental belief. It's actually the belief that holds kind of everything together. Just the belief that I exist. So that can weirdly still be there, even after having all these shifts that I've been describing so far. There can still be this super subtle, totally imperceivable kind of like a filter, totally transparent filter in the experience. It's like a sense of self, but it's so diluted to the experience. It's so transparent, it's so crystalline, it's so boundless, it's so infinite, it's so pure, that it feels like it's not even there. It's like this totally invisible lens in the experience. So it's like a confinement that you don't even feel that it's there, because everything feels so liberated, so boundless, so unconfined. And yet there is this key confinement platform, for any kind of sense of self, any kind of spiritual sense of self, any kind of liberated sense of self, any kind of non-dual sense of self, any kind of separated sense of self, any kind of fixated sense of self. There is actually this fundamental self-construct. That's the best way that I can describe it. Okay, and at this level, when this is being seen through and released, when it drops away, it's such an impersonal event. And it's acausal, it's spontaneous, it's totally effortless. It's this type of fundamental letting go at the root level of being. It's beyond description. It's a death. It's dying before you die. That's what it basically is. But at the level of insight, what happens here that we really see that the I, it never actually was there. Any kind of I. That it was literally just a thought. So that's why it doesn't really drop away, because it never was there. And with this fundamental I sense, disappears completely your interior life. Any kind of sense of interiority whatsoever. Because that can still be there after those previous shifts. Like after you realize non-duality with the sixth and seventh fetter, there can still be a sense of something inner. It's now very clear that the apparent exterior world is actually interior, to your very own presence and consciousness, but it's still there. With the dropping away of the eighth fetter, the I am conceit, disappears any kind of sense of interiority whatsoever. And with that, of course, disappears any kind of sense of there being anything exterior, like that whole pair completely collapses. And one way it can be felt is just this total zero dimensional, zero depth, zero distance immediacy in the experience. After this, there's no possibility in any possible manner whatsoever to step back from the experience, to look at the experience, to have a perspective on the experience. It's just not available anymore. After this fetter drops, the possibility of stabilizing yourself into any kind of sense of identity is not there anymore to be found. You can't do that anymore. And now you see that that's what that fetter was all about, that fundamental I am sense. It created a false sense of stability and safety that you would always anchor into it. Oh, that's what's always here. My own presence, that I exist. And now it's no longer available. You can't anchor yourself anywhere. There's no anchor. There's no ground, literally. There are no reference points. And for some people, this can be like shocking or really bewildering, this particular shift. It can feel like a tremendous loss, kind of like impossible loss, this total just disillusionment. Because you also see that what is lost here, it was never there. But what's so shocking about it is that now you completely exit the way of perceiving reality in a way that other people do, including all the spiritual people, by the way. It's like it's gone. All of it is gone. And you also see very clearly that the spiritual people, this is not, they don't want this. Like, this is not wantable. No one would want this. And weirdly, at the same time, it's such a deep homecoming. It's such a deep homecoming. So I would say that this is what everyone is truly longing for, but no one would want this at the conscious level because you cannot want your own absence. The self cannot want its own absence. It cannot want this experience of death, which is inconceivable. Nothing can prepare you for this. There's no imagination that can even slightly prepare you for this, how it's going to be. It's such an embodied experience again. It's nothing at the level of the mind. It's a profound energetic letting go at the root level of your being. The dropping away of the I am conceit. Okay. So after this shift, it's very clear that any kind of, there's just no I. It doesn't mean anything whatsoever. You can still use the I, as a word. You can use I statements, but there's just no, there's just, it's just not there. And with the I goes you. So there's no other. There's literally no other. And that's also very clear. And you can still use you statements in the relational context, of course, but it's very obvious that there's no one here. And there never was. So this is non-duality. It's not wantable. It's unspeakable. The mind cannot imagine this. The language cannot describe it. Because the language is built on, all these dichotomies, all these dualistic pairs, me and you, subject, object, so on and so on. It's just not describable what it is when that type of experience stops, when it ceases. That there's no subjects and there's no objects. There's no I, there's no you. There's no world. There's not a speck of solidity in all of this. There's no any actual reality or existence to any of this. But it's not a negation. Like the actual felt experience of it is actually more like, it's very affirming, because you actually realize that all those forms of self, all those fetters, they were actually forms of resistance in a form of belief. So when that resistance drops away layer by layer by layer, there's just this increasing natural just openness, just this increasing natural turning towards the experience, which is just spontaneously happening. And that can be felt kind of like yes, and yes, and yes. Or maybe more correct way of saying it is that there's absence of no, there's absence of negotiation with reality. There's absence of, trying to manipulate reality or manage the reality or control the reality. But there's actually still 2 fetters to go, which is very related to what I was saying here. So this was the 8th fetter. So after this, we are going to encounter this very interesting phase that in the unfettering model is called the 9th fetter, meaning restlessness. And this is connected to the 4th and 5th fetters, so to the ill will and desire, that pushing and pulling, that primal will. But here it is in a lot more impersonal manner expressing itself. So it's not anymore an experience that, if this person would have done it, this and something, what I wanted them to do, then I would feel like this. So it's not anymore, those type of kind of beliefs or thoughts don't really happen here anymore. So, but what does happen is that after the I am fetter drops away, there's suddenly the unfiltered raw nature of the experience is just so indescribable, even it's at the same time totally empty. But we can kind of sense how there's still something in the experience that is looking for these type of fundamental beliefs in reality that are nowhere to be found, meaning safety, control, or possibility safety, possibility of control, continuity. That's a big one. Feeling good, or satisfaction, or substance, security, predictability. So it's very non-conceptual, it's just purely energetic, the experience here. But something is reacting still in this very like primal manner in our system to the absence of these things. And then we can kind of start to see how we've been projecting these qualities on reality constantly. And then when there is friction, because reality, doesn't have any actual continuity, then we suffer. Or we project the belief, that I should be able to feel good always. There should be something in the experience that I can kind of anchor myself, that I can feel good. And the I am fetter is actually one way of doing that, like grounding yourself in that natural presence. And now that's no longer available. So you kind of realize that there has been this belief that it's possible to always feel satisfied. And I've been kind of trying to manipulate reality in so many various ways, using spirituality as a way to do it, so that I could always feel satisfied, or kind of arguing with reality when I don't feel satisfied. And now it finally becomes obvious that all of that has been a kind of something casting out there, something, and it's just not available, this satisfactory feeling good experience, this experience of continuity, this experience of there being some substance to anything. So with substance comes also the sense that something can be known, So when we know something, it kind of feels that, I can kind of rely on that. There's some substance to it. But when that drops away with the I am experience, it's just nowhere to be found. You kind of realize that nothing can really be known. But there is still reaction in the system that is trying to find that substance, knowability, security, and so on. So this can play out in various ways to different people. And here it's really like whatever unresolved trauma is still in the system, here it's gonna come out totally in open. There's nothing anymore covering it in the system. There's nothing anymore repressing it. So that's why it's so important to do this type of trauma work that I was describing earlier with the fetters 4 and 5, like ill will and desire, to really have at least to a certain extent addressed and coming in conscious contact, with those wounded parts of our being, and being able to kind of integrate that experience, at least to some extent, because if it hasn't been done, here it's going to be so intense, the experience, and so undifferentiated. Like you have no access to really conceptualization here, so you don't have access to thinking mind. You're not going to understand what's happening, for most people at least. It's just going to be so immersive. Like this core trauma is just going to kind of emerge just as undifferentiated pure energy and inseparable from the wholeness of experience, which is constantly shifting and morphing, where there is no you, there is no world, there is no other, where there's nothing to hold on to. There's no ground whatsoever. But the good news is that here, finally, you could say, the root of the trauma can be accessed and released. So it really allows this kind of healing and integration beyond imagination, which is just not at all accessible as long as those layers of self are covering it. So, yeah. Like someone who has arrived this far on the journey. So according to this model, unfettering model, it is said that they have accessed the root cause of suffering and resolved it in their own being. And they can also teach it to others now. So that's the ninth fetter. And the 10th fetter, it's interesting, it's sometimes called not knowing or ignorance. So it's this final belief, that anything could be known whatsoever. So when this drops away, then all these expressions, like my true nature, or knowing yourself, you wake up from the dream of separation, but then you kind of discover this true identity. So that type of knowledge, or any kind of knowledge regarding reality. So you wake up from the conventional reality, but then it can be replaced by these ontologies that, everything is consciousness, or reality is totally empty, or it's just pure potentiality. So that's still a form of knowledge, even it's based on direct experience. So with the 10th fetter, all of those are dropped when the 10th fetter drops. It's like they just stop making sense. And it's very much like they say in Zen that the mountains are now just mountains again. Okay? So when you look around, there's no need anymore to kind of be like, oh wow, everything is so empty and there's no objects out there and it's just pure energy or whatever. So all those expressions totally cease making sense. There's no need anymore to monitor the experience, to reflect upon it, to kind of have these type of thoughts about it at all. They just cease arising. So in the end, it's not like you finally come to realize how things actually are, or what reality actually is, the nature of reality, or your true nature. So and now you can go around and tell others about this. It's nothing like that. It's almost like the total opposite. It's this amazing ignorance. Like that's what they mean when they say that the enlightened person is totally ignorant. They've lost everything. Not only they lost these beliefs about separation or separate self or being a separate self, they also lost all spiritual knowledge, and all these awakened identities. And of course, these fundamental shifts that has occurred with the unfettering process, they are still, valid. They're still there. they are irreversible. So there's no form, there's no boundaries, there's no separation, there's no solidity, there's no substance, there's no continuity, all of that. So that's still here. But when you are just so kind of used to it, it just becomes so normal when it's been so integrated, when you start to be so acclimated to it. So the emptiness is it's just the way things are, and it just stops making any kind of sense to even talk about it, or you're not really able to perceive it anymore. Like when the integration is still happening and when you're still in the process, you can kind of still feel into the things and you can discover directly, endlessly, like, wow, everything is empty. But at some point, even that ceases to be available. It's just like that's just not anymore happening. Okay. Yeah, everything is for sure empty, but there's no need to, put attention there or consider it as something important. And the 10th fetter, I think there's a lot more to be said about it. And I mean, this is like deepened realization, like any of the fetters, there could be so much more to say about it. And was just a tiny little scratch. It was based on my experience. Like I'm not an expert on the unfettering model, but the 10th fetter, I think it's actually a really, really deep, interesting discovery, what it's actually about, this fundamental ignorance, that anything could be known in the first place. But yeah, this I hope I managed to unpack it at least a little bit, the unfettering model, and what it practically means in terms of the awakening journey, and in terms of describing these fundamental perceptual shifts that occur within the awakening journey. And I think it's a little bit more descriptive to call them irreversible shifts than stages of realization, because stages sound more like something that you are acquiring, and this is more like you're just losing, something drops away, confinements drops away, ever more subtle and deeply rooted confinements regarding any sense of self drop away until there's no sense of self whatsoever to be left.